Hello, this is How To Bob, and I'm going to show you how I changed the rear brakes on a 2007 Ford F250. I'm going to start out like I always do when I change brakes with some disc brake quiet, and I put that on first so that it has some time to dry. I don't get it all over my hands, and it usually recommends about 20 minutes dry time for this stuff before you put the pads in. So I put a little bit on there, and then I just take my finger and smear it around, get a nice good coat on there, and then I let it dry while I begin working on the vehicle. The first thing I'm going to do is to jack my vehicle up, and I want to raise it up just enough to get the tire off the ground, and then I'm going to put a jack stand under there just for safety, and I pull off the lug nut cover, and then I can start taking my lug nuts off. Once I get my lug nuts off, I can pull the tire and get that out of my way. And close look here, you can see it's very rusted, so I'm going to take the pin here. This holds the caliper off, and it's a 1/2 inch socket that I'm using, and I use a wrench here, and this is the bolt that I took out. There's two of them, one at the top and one at the bottom of the caliper. And now I'm going to spread my brake pads just a little bit. That makes it a little easier to pull the caliper off of the vehicle. But before I do that, I'm going to make sure that I have a wire coat hanger, and this is used to hang the caliper. I'm just going to hang it from the leaf springs here. That'll keep any strain off of the brake line so I don't do any damage to it, and I want to make sure it's tied up real good before I go ahead and pull it off. I can pull the caliper off now. Take my last bolt out and pull the caliper straight out, wiggle it out. Now you can see this is pretty rusted, and actually the outer brake pad is, the inner one comes out fairly easy, but the outer one, as you can see, I have to use a screwdriver to gently pry this one off. The outer brake pad is actually rusted into place. It is actually seized up, so I'm going to have a little more difficult time than I did on the inner one. You can see this is very well worn. It is through its life. So on the outer one is going to be a little more difficult here. I have to work at this one to get it off. I'm going to use a little PB blaster. It's just a penetrating oil. Works well on grease, and that seems to have loosened it up. So now I've got my outer pad. You can see that it had more pad on it, and I'm just going to clean out my rails here where the brake pads will slide back and forth. I want to make sure they're good and clean. Wipe those out, get any old rust out of there. Now what I'm going to do is get the wire brush that goes on the end of the drill and just clean off these little slide rails to make sure they have a good clean surface. Then I'm going to get my brake lubricant, and I'm going to put a little bit of that on my finger here, and there's little pins that the caliper slides back and forth on. I'm going to go ahead and pull those out and make sure that they are lubed up. I've heard that these get seized up, so I want to make sure that I have them good and lubricated up. Just put a little bit on there and then put it back into place. And I want to make sure that boot pops into place so that no dust gets in there. And I'm going to go ahead and pull the other one off. Smear a little bit of brake grease around that. Just put a light coating of grease over the pin and pop it back in. Make sure that the boot goes into place. Now the next thing I'm going to do with my brake lube, put a little bit more on, and these channels here, you'll see channel on the top, channel on the bottom for each brake pad. That's where the brakes slide back and forth. I want to make sure that's lubed up so that my brakes can actually squeeze back and forth. And I want to do that on the inside and the outside of the channels here. And you can see I have my brake pads, and these come with some stainless steel spring clips, and they go on just like that. And what these do is pull the brake back off of the disc so that it's not constantly rubbing. You can see how it has a spring type action, and once I put these on here you'll be able to see. So before I put those on, I'm going to go ahead and spread my caliper out, and I have a brake caliper spreading tool here, and how that works is you just simply screw it in and it'll push the piston in the caliper far enough out. And you want to make sure that goes far enough out because the new brake pads are a little bit bigger than the ones that were removed, so it won't fit unless you push the piston. In this case, there's two of them. You have to push them back. Now I've got that pushed back, I can go ahead and put my brake pads in. I'm going to put the inner one here in first, and you just slide it into the channels and it'll kind of stay in place. And you want to make sure the springs are on the outside so that they give a little spring back. You can see here. And then I'm going to put my other one in, put the outer brake pad, just line up the two channels, and you can see how this would clamp together once the pistons are on and it springs back. So pretty happy with how that works. Now when I put my bolts back in here, I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite on there since it's brake, and they did have those in there, so I'm going to go ahead and put some Loctite on. I've got my caliper spread apart and I can slide them on fairly easily. I have to push my brake pads together to make sure that it fits, but it goes right back in, and I want to line up my two holes. And once I get both sets of holes lined up here, I can go ahead and put my bolts back in. And I'll use my 1/2-inch socket once I get this last bolt in here, and a adjustable wrench to hold the other side in place. Now, once I get my two bolts snugged down, I want to make sure that my spring clips are located on the outside and they're working, so that's good. Then I can go ahead and put the tire back onto the vehicle, and I want to put my lug nuts on by hand first. I don't want to start out with the impact driver, but I'll go ahead and put all my lug nuts on, and then I can use the impact driver to tighten them up. Once I get them all tightened, I can go ahead and take the jack stand out and lower the vehicle. Then I'm going to put my lug nut cover back on, and the most important thing, after you're done, you want to make sure that you pump the brakes. This is how to bob. Thanks for watching.